One of the strangest contradictions in the Alberta political dialogue recently was all the discussion of how we need more capacity to transport oil out of the province immediately after announcing a cut in production to deal with the glut. We are surrounded, bombarded by all sorts of pipeline announcements, symbolic or otherwise, that say that we need to have more of these things, even when the cost of every sort of transmission is skyrocketing. The number of options we have for moving things into and out of our houses, including information, is increasing so much that we can never possibly use all of the available capacity we are being given and forced to pay for. But also, I think one of the biggest lies is that pipelines don't kill people. There was a recent, very dramatic incident in Mexico that I'll link to, and you can go and read about it if you want. But in countries that are very poor and have had a lot of trouble with corruption, especially connected to corruption, connected to the extraction of natural resources, like, say, Nigeria, pipelines do kill a lot of people because people eventually get so poor because of the way the pipeline system works, withholding it, the resource from the people who live right over top of it, pulling, piping it out, sending it somewhere else, turning the end user people and the transmission people and the upstream people all against each other, and then starving them all to the point where they have to punch a hole in the pipeline to steal back what should have been theirs in the first place. That eventually these things have health costs because people are being exposed to all sorts of toxins, or they have instant death costs because there's a leak or an explosion when people try to take back the minimum amount of something that they need to survive. In the process, when you make people poorer through the building of all this unnecessary and waste-encouraging infrastructure, you really undermine people spiritually, psychologically, economically, in all sorts of ways when their land is stolen. Because all this infrastructure creates the supposed need, which is supposedly for the public benefit, to take people's property. And this is in the case of, say, a hydroelectric dam. You got to flood. You got to take the people, the property of the people whose land is being flooded. Then you got to take the property of the people whose transmission lines take whose property is taken for the sake of transmission lines of all sorts. And typically, you give up an inch and you end up losing a mile because there are all sorts of restrictions on the use of your property that come about when one of these things is built across it. And the distance that some of these things are transmitted is absolutely incredible. People might have water table 10 feet below their house, and yet they're paying for water that's been transported 10 or 20 miles or more to get to the house. Or it might fall from the sky, and they're not harvesting that enough to fund their living space or support it. The amounts of money and loss of life on these things are just incredible. And the cost, if you look at any bill, any electric bill, what used to be just an electric bill, the number of things on the bill goes up and up and up. And the number of intermediaries and the number of taxes and the number of things that you pay that have nothing to do with the actual commodity goes up and up and up. One of the most dramatic of these is garbage. It's on your electricity bill, at least where I live now. And there used to be a flat fee. It was about $16 a year that you paid for all sorts of garbage collection. It was taken out of property taxes. Well, that fee is still there, but in recent years there have been incremental ones added on. And they're now over $20 a month. So you're now paying about 16 times the original cost of having garbage just for the incremental costs. Then those are just the cash costs that you pay for your green bin, your black bin, and your blue bin. You used to have maybe one metal can that was less than half the size of each of the ones you have now. So the amount of space given up to take out all this garbage has gone up at least, I would say, sixfold because of the size of all the containers involved and all the clutter. You have this clutter forced upon you for a system that's supposed to remove the clutter. I figured out the average space. If you have, say, 300,000 dwellings where you have all these bins and you multiply that out, that's like 1 million of these these bins. And they each occupy over a square foot of space, probably close to 2 square feet. So there's maybe 6 square feet of space per dwelling, and multiply this out. And this is like 200 it worked out to 45 acres for the whole city, which is a pretty good sized landfill space that's just sitting all the time on people's properties now. And the space occupied was about $200 million worth, if you figure it out as about $100 a square foot, because you're forcing all this waste collection capacity onto the most valuable developed land that is people's property. And you're also forcing them to do all sorts of slave labor. And because the system is so much more difficult to follow than it once was, you can have your garbage failed to be picked up because you didn't put it on the curb the right way. And you got to do it on the right day of the month or the week, and you got to take the thing in and out at just the right time. So there are all these additional restrictions now, and sometimes people are so worried about waste anyway that they might be doing their own composting in the yard, or carrying a lot of it out to community recycling bins. So not only are you paying for all this capacity and being encouraged to overuse waste because you got to pay whether, no matter how much or how little you use, but much of the time you're going to end up, because the schedule's so inconvenient, carrying it to a recycling thing that's several blocks away to dump it, just because it's not the right day of the week. So all of these, there's this immense amount of labor, just the amount of labor that most people would spend standing at a set of recycling bins wondering which one to put their garbage in. Just that is probably the amount of time that the system spends picking up your garbage every month, just those few seconds. And yet you're paying for all that time. It works out, must be more than $100 an hour that you're paying to have your stuff picked up. And yet you're not paid for all the work and sorting and so on that you have to do to put your garbage in the right category. So all of these things undermine and demoralize and put stress and force additional labor stresses on people, which are slowly, of course, now killing them, especially the legal battles that people would have to get into, the networking, the legal research you have to do to figure out how to fight all this stuff, which I'm here to do, because it's getting to a point where we are all going to be either forced out of our living spaces by the mounting costs, or simply outright killed by all the health dangers and stresses we're exposed to. And the legislation, anti-life legislation that gets heavier every year, in which we're treated as polluters just for exhaling. So there's all these things that come together currently, at least in our political election, and then the top contenders are all arguing who is going to be the best at stealing from people. Okay, we can build the pipeline faster. We can push this through, even though it's uneconomic. Right? We can steal all these people's land in other political jurisdictions where we don't have the power. We're hard at work for you, making those $200,000 speeches and slipping money under the table, bribing the people in the other political jurisdiction to stomp on the property rights of all the individuals along this line to get this thing through. We're hard at work, doing what we're supposed to be doing. Well, that's the number one clue, that you should not be voting for any of these people, because they are asking for a mandate to steal even more than they already are. And that's the trouble. There's this huge industry. All these things which are supposedly oil and banking and the other ones are just fascism, communism, property seizure industries. That's what they are there for. And they've built up this whole infrastructure of people who are trained and highly paid and experienced at doing nothing but stealing and keeping the people on either end of the transmission system, or the people next door to each other, who all have their individual pipelines, symbolic and otherwise, leading it out, in and out, separated and divided amongst each other. And you can see this in any newscast. The clue I got from it was there was a divide and conquer the little people story, and then there was a thing saying about how we need more centralization of power, and then saying that anybody who argues against that has something wrong with it. And there's a global warming story, of course, which is the infrastructure built up to support the worldwide dictatorship in terms of currency. And then there was a pipeline story, and it was about the crashing of rail cars on saying, rail bad, pipeline good. The only difference is that rail is an existing right-of-way, whereas the pipelines being promoted are new ones. And then they're always promoting new ones because they can seize more property that way. And it's not that people don't die in pipelines, because you can check the story I'll link to see that that does in fact happen all the time.